Good morning. Hey, more of you woke up earlier than I thought you would. This is excellent. You got donuts and everything. We're not above bribing you. It works. I'm glad that you're here this morning. We're going to finish this series entitled Matters of the Heart. The first week of the series, this whole series is based on a love story found in the Old Testament. It's based out of a book that bears the name Ruth, who is only one of four women mentioned in a very critical genealogy, and genealogies were everything in the day of the Old Testament and even living into the time of the New Covenant, the New Testament that begins in the book of Matthew and marches on through the book of Revelation. I've got a pretty weird last name. Anybody else have a weird? How many of you think your last name's weird? My last name is so rare and so weird that English teachers struggle to pronounce it. They don't know how to get it all together, so they put extra letters in it in places that are just strange and awkward even to me. A matter of fact, my last name is so rare, it is can anybody guess what the most popular last name is? Smith. It's the number one last name in America. I thought that was interesting, not shocking. How many of you wish your last name was Smith? It'd be easier when they call for reservations at a restaurant, right? Our last name in popularity, according to how many of their army.com, is 21,438th most popular. I think we're climbing the list. We're almost there. Genealogies are interesting and they're difficult, and they trace certain things and they trace parts of our story and parts of our life. And I don't know how far back you can go in your genealogy. On one side we can go a ways. On the other side it's a little clunkier for us. There's scandal in my genealogy. There's forbidden relationships in my genealogy. There's things that you would prefer never to be brought to light in my genealogy on one side. Anybody else have some genealogy you're a little sketchy about? Let me tell you, the Bible says you're in really good company. Genealogies were really important in the time that we're in the story of Ruth. And so we're going to wrap this series up. The first week, we looked at chapter 1, Hurts Matter. That was the title, and I said this: don't let your present hurt rob you of future hope. And man, that is so much easier to say than it is to live, isn't it? Don't allow your present hurt to rob you of future hope. Sounds poetic and articulate with our words, but it's difficult to embrace and to live with our life. We see two ladies in the story in chapter 1. One didn't allow her present hurt to rob her, the other did. Naomi's present hurt robbed her so much that she changed her name from Naomi to Mara, from beautiful to bitter. Ruth embraced hope. And when things seem the most bleak, choose hope. Choose hope. So many things in our life are a choice. So many things in our life are a decision that we make and then the actions that we take. Hope is a choice. Despair is a choice. They're both followed by feelings. And I'm not going to stand up here and say that it's easy to choose hope, but I'll tell you what, when you do choose hope, it seems to give the future an uptick toward leaning into. The second week, we talked about choices matter. Matters of the heart, your choices matter. And I said this: our choices now impact our future later, don't they? Our choices now, our choices in the now impact our future later. What we do now matters later. Ruth and Naomi both had choices to make. One chose hope, the other despair. Ruth in chapter 2 said, I'm going to go out and do what's necessary. See, because so often we just hope things get better, but the way that we ought to engage with our life is not to just merely hope, it's to then activate our behaviors toward that hope. It's to move with intentionality in our choices toward hope. Yes. The third week, we talked about hope matters. To live above your circumstances, choose hope over despair. You'll see a theme when we put it all together, don't you? You can live in hope over despair. You want to live above your circumstances, choose hope. You want to live below your circumstances, choose despair. But one or the other will be your choice. You have more power than you think you do. You have more power than you think you do. Last week, I talked about character matters. If you were any of you in the second service last week? Yeah, about 5 of you, so you heard the rant that I had to get back to on this. I kind of went left field in the political arena. Not quite like a Trump rally. Or some bizarre claim from either side. Anyway, character, it matters. Character always matters. Character will never stop mattering. It will always and continually be of importance in life. Character. Who you are when nobody else is looking comes to the surface where everybody sees. Your behavior, I told you, is your character on display. Your behavior is your character. Your behavior, the actions of your life, represent the character upon which you live, right? The things you watch, the things you listen to, the things you speak, the things you do are representative of the character that makes up who you are. Hey, I know it's early. I got donuts and coffee. You can talk to me. I mean, that's just good. Your behavior is your character on display. It's that simple. It's that complicated. But nonetheless, it's true. We see it all throughout this simple, short, tragic, beautiful love story. Character. Boaz, even though he wanted to make a very quick decision, did what was right instead of what felt good in the moment. He did what was right. People in recovery know this. You stay in recovery by doing the next right thing. Right? You stay in recovery by doing the next right thing. Boaz did the next right thing. His character was on display, and in an amazing way, he brought beautiful things to the story. And then today, we wrap up with outcomes matter, don't they? Outcomes matter. And I believe this, your attitude and actions shape your outcomes. Your attitude and my actions are my responsibility. And they shape the outcomes of my life. You know, we live in a generation and in a time where we want to think everybody's problems are somebody else's responsibility. Amen. Don't we? Hey, listen, if you want to graduate with no college debt, I've got an idea. Don't believe the government's going to pay for it. Work hard in the summer. How is this possible? See, we live in this polarity. We live in this time frame where somehow everybody's problem is somebody else's responsibility, but the outcomes of your life are your responsibility. They lead to your legacy. It's hard, but it's true. I'm not trying to be political. I do not believe there's a political solution for the problems we face. I can't be more clear about that. I don't think politics are going to fix any of it. That's right. But I know one thing. I know one thing for sure. My attitude and my actions are mine. Yes. Your attitudes and actions are yours. Yes. And they lead to the outcomes we live with. Amen. Now, I know that our lives get affected by the decisions of other people. I know that there are innocent bystanders, and I understand there is collateral damage, but I also know this, that the attitude and actions of our life lead greatly to the outcomes of our life. Amen. So we break into the story, chapter 4. If you haven't been here for the rest of the series, you can catch it, I'm told, online. You can find it on our Facebook page or our website under the video cast. Chapter 4, beginning at verse 13. So before we get here, Boaz went to the city gate and he did what was right. He said, hey, you're the closest Goel, the closest kinsman redeemer. You have the right before I have the right to redeem the property that Naomi, Elimelech's widow, and Ruth, Mahlon's widow, are selling to the next of kin. And he said, well, I'll take the property. And he said, but listen, if you do that, you bear the responsibility of taking the widows. And you need to make Ruth your wife so that the genealogy doesn't die with Mahlon. Well, I can't do that. My wife wouldn't like it. Okay, then I'll do it, because he didn't have a wife. So here we go, verse 13, chapter 4. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. In 15 Hebrew words, they summarize 9+ months. Isn't that great? Don't we all wish it just went that fast? And then they were feeding themselves and going to sleep all night. Anyway, no, not at all how it works. The women said to Naomi, now remember the women, when Naomi was making her way back into the village, and they said, is that Naomi? Could it really be her? And she said to the women, don't call me Naomi any longer, because I left full, but now I come back empty. Call me Mara, because I'm bitter, right? The women have gathered around Naomi and said, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who's better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. The women come around Naomi, and she's got the baby, and she's doing what grandmothers do, probably taking out her iPhone, snapping 95 pictures. Do you remember when they would take out their wallet and it was that big, accordion of pictures? Remember that? I'm so grateful for iPhones. Naomi's with the baby, and the women come around, and they say, you're really blessed. God came through for you. What they're really saying is God never did abandon you, Naomi. God never did give up. God never quit caring. Matter of fact, He's provided in such an incredible way. He has given you a kinsman redeemer. May He become famous, and indeed He does. May He become famous. Last week I said, what would it be like? I asked the question, if we began to speak blessings over other people. What would it look like if I came to Corey and said, Corey, man, may the Lord bless you and prosper you. May you be the best father to your girls. May He grant you long life and wisdom. Amen. Instead of, hey, Corey, why'd you wear that sweatshirt? Spring has sprung. They begin, one of the things I love all through the Old Testament in the Jewish culture, they would speak blessings. They would speak blessings. They would speak hope. They would garnish other lives with the truth and the hope that they had in their walk with their Savior, with the God of Israel, the God who drove out every opposing army on their behalf. See, they lived with this reality that if God could drop the walls of Jericho, then certainly He can prevail for you. If God could team up the water of the Jordan and we would pass on dry ground, certainly our God is big enough to hear your plight. I believe, right, they would say it with conviction, that the God of the angel armies who parted the Red Sea and left Pharaoh and the chariots in the water, if our God is that mighty, then He certainly will incline His listening ear to your discomfort and heartache. And they begin to speak blessings. I love it. He'll renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and who's better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. She said, the women are saying, man, what we wouldn't give for a Ruth, the Moabitess, to be our daughter-in-law. Right? When Ruth first got to town, she was known as what? The outsider. Now she's known as the one that everybody wishes was a part of their family. When they say, she's been better to you than 7 sons, the number 7 in the Bible represents completion. Right? There would be 7 seasons. 7 times 7 would be 49. On the 49th year, it was the year of Jubilee. All land was returned to its original owner. All property and debts were canceled, right? 7 completed everything in the Bible. It's the number of completion. So when they say it's just true, they wouldn't go, well, she's been better to you than 6 sons. Or they didn't just pick a random, she's been really a lot better to you than 13 nasty, ratty boys. See, sons represented security and wealth in a family line. The genealogy would go far and wide through sons. Through daughters, it didn't carry the same effect. Anyway, isn't it great to see how God moved in Naomi's life? Amen. Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed, which in its original meaning is worshiper. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. That's just good stuff. Amen. If you know anything about the history, if you have a working understanding of the history, then you understand what just happened in the reality. Amen. That God did something incredibly, incredibly beautiful. Amen. You see, Ruth lived her life not based on her hurts, but based on her hopes. She required her character to determine her choices. She didn't allow her choices to alter her character. She didn't allow her hope to be extinguished because hurt had shown up. In the outcome of her life, we find it speaking all the way in to the very beginning of the new covenant we find being laid out in Matthew chapter 1. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. The son of David, the son of Abraham. Right? They're pinning Jesus, right? The whole reason that we're here trails back to this Moabitess who was a nobody that God made a somebody. And if you feel like a nobody, I've got a good word. God says you're somebody. Amen. God believes in you more than you believe in yourself. Don't quit. Don't give up even when it's hard because God's for you. Hebrews 12 says, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, He's cheering you on. The beginning of Matthew's gospel finds itself pinning Jesus to David. All the way back to Abraham. I love this genealogy. I'm going to save it and preach on it another time. It's so good. It's really good. I think I know where I'm going to head for Christmas in our preaching series. It's so good. It is riddled with scandal. There are prostitutes in the genealogy of Jesus. The 4 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus, I'm not going to spoil it. It's really good. So good. Guess who's David's grandma is? Isn't that cool? I don't know what you're thinking right now, but I know what I'm thinking is that our God is bigger. Our God is bigger. What if this is rhetorical and it's really to me. What if I began to really believe every difficulty I face that my God is bigger? What if everything that comes into my rangefinder that the enemy wants to weaponize in fear, I defeat in faith that my God is bigger? This story just reverberates with truth that God is bigger. He's for you. He's not against you. When hard things come, realize hard things are a part of life. If you live long enough, the reward of living long is that hard things show up. If you think God doesn't love me because something hard happened, then you have a very small mind and very, very shallow faith. Sorry, but it's true. We live in this day and age in America where whenever something hard happens, we begin to question everything. You know what I love about the Jewish faith and the Jewish culture? They don't question God. They get to the other side of the river, and they still make lots of mistakes. They still make lots of mistakes. And you know God is so stubborn in His commitments, and I love it. Don't you love that God is a covenant-keeping God? Don't you love that when Israel was doing stupid thing after stupid thing, God is saying, well, they're my people. Any parents ever said, well, they're our kids. Want to wring their necks? They're our kids. If you haven't, hang on. I'll get back to Ruth. This then's the family line of Perez. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Abinadab. Abinadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz. Boaz, the father of Obed. Amen. Obed, the father of Jesse, from whose stump will come the Christ in Isaiah. The father of David. When I read this, it is apparent to me that Ruth and Boaz were people who understood that attitudes and actions pair together and create outcomes. They understood that who they were mattered and that their lives counted. They understood that if they tried to shirk their responsibility and blame God, bad things would happen. They leaned in. They leaned into the struggle instead of leaning out. And the outcome? They both find their way into a genealogy that has changed the entire world. I mean, can you just get your mind around this if you can? It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. This story, this 4-chapter little story sandwiched in the Old Testament, tells us so much about the character of God, not just the character of the characters. Amen. That our God is able to redeem all of our messes. That our God can take your mess and make it a message. Our God can work miracles in the hopelessness that we live in. Our God is bigger than that. That He is always working for us, and when we live in obedience and surrender, God shows up in miraculous ways. I love that this looked down upon outsider, much like Rahab, the prostitute of Jericho, much like Uriah's wife that you read in Matthew named Bathsheba. It's interesting, the names we find in the critical genealogy that changed the world. So for all of you that raised your hand and said, yeah, there's a branch of the tree that needs more branches and a lot less explaining, you're in good company. Maybe you're not pedigreed like royalty, but God still calls you his child. Amen. And that trumps every pedigree that we can create in our humanity. Maybe you're here and you would say, the truth is, I've been living in hurt. I've come to know this, if I know anything, that throughout our life we live in seasons, and different seasons usher in different things. And perhaps you're in a season where everything is really just going well. Rejoice. Yes. Rejoice. Those are times to rejoice. Don't forget God in your rejoicing, because he's the giver of every good and perfect gift in your life. But rejoice. If things are good, rejoice. If things are hard, give him praise. Is it tough to praise God when things are hard for you? It's not as tough to pray when things are hard, is it? But is it difficult to give God praise? Is it difficult to say, you're holy? Man, you're so good. You're powerful. You're mighty. See, there was something about Ruth and Boaz that they refused to believe that God wasn't still good, even though life was still hard. They leaned in. Yes. I want to be like that. How about you? I want to be. I think it would be good at some point in your life. Now, this is a little morbid, but just hang with me for a minute. For everybody to write their own epitaph. You know the epitaph, the short saying that goes on your tombstone. By virtue of my job, I spend a little bit of time in cemeteries. Over the last year, I've been in more cemeteries than I care to be in. But I've noticed sayings on tombstones. Some of them are quite catchy. Some of them kind of funny. But I think the epitaph is meant to capture the essence of what life was about for that person. Yes. Right? Yes. Here lies, whoever, fill in the blank. A person of fill in the blank. What would it look like for you? How would it read for you? What would you like your epitaph to say? I think for Boaz it would say something like this. Here lies Boaz, a man of character and integrity, a man of faith and belief. Seems redundant, but to say you have faith is different than to operate as if you have belief. It's easy to say we have faith. It's different to operate as if we have belief. You'll see where your faith really lies when the things are at their darkest, when things are at their hardest. Epitaph living. I want to be like Boaz and Ruth, and I want to have character and integrity on display in my life. Yes. Even when things are hard. I mean, it's so good. They lived it out, and then God blessed them in this incredible way, and all the way through to the coming of the Christ, to the very present moment. We're talking about this obscure lady who lived in Moab, who comes from a genealogy of incest that God redeems through his glory and gives an incredible blessing to every one of us called Jesus. Isn't that incredible? Your mess can become a message. Your hurt can turn to hope. Your corrupted character can be captured. But it all comes down to this. The truth of this story is it all hinged on choices that were made. That's right. The entire story hinged on personal choices. And our personal choices will either take us closer to God or carry us farther from Him. Amen. We're either walking toward God or away from God. There's never neutral. There just isn't neutral. I wish there could be neutral. I mean, Jesus said a lot of really hard stuff. That's a series I'm going into after Easter. The title is, I Wish Jesus Never Said. I hope you'll invite your friends. It should be fun. Here are a couple questions I hope you'll spend some time asking. What's one lesson you've learned from Ruth's life and her story? Hey, you know what? In our next building, you won't even see people doing this right here. They'll come out from behind a curtain. It'll be like the Wizard of Oz or something. Aww. I'm not sure what it'll be like to preach distraction-free and to have a real office. What's a lesson that you've learned? When you read the 4 chapters, what's a lesson that you've learned about her life and story? Not just one that you heard, but one that you learned, right? Learning something means we apply it to our life. And then how are your current attitudes and actions shaping your future outcomes? How are your attitudes and actions shaping your future outcomes? Is God calling you to be a Ruth to a Naomi? Is there somebody in your life that you know, man, they just need an encouragement, and they need somebody that'll care enough to be an encouragement and to speak truth and kindness to them? You know, a Naomi, I think, looks like somebody that's just always finding the problems in life. If you gave Naomi $100, $100 bill, she'd be angry because it wasn't $250s, right? That's right. Do you know somebody like that needs encouragement? Maybe God's calling you to be like Ruth and to be that for her. This is what I know. Our attitudes and our actions, they lead and become our outcomes.